Thank you for being here. If you will, open your Bibles with me to the book of Matthew, chapter 15, as we're going to be looking at today. Matthew chapter 15. The book of Matthew chapter 15 opens up with a group of Pharisees and scribes, these are religious leaders that are coming from Jerusalem to Galilee to confront Jesus. Now understand that this journey that they made from Jerusalem to Galilee was not a short trip. It's about 75 miles for them to get to the area that Jesus had been ministering in. And that's important because it wasn't that they just bumped into Jesus. You know, sometimes in my mind, and playing this movie of what the Bible's like in my mind, I think, oh, well, they just ran into Jesus. Or Jesus was just there where they were at and they saw him and they started saying all this stuff. But these people didn't just bump into him at Walmart, okay? They went out of their way. This was a very intentional trip. They sought Jesus out and they came to him, a 75-mile journey, on a specific fault-finding mission. They had heard about Jesus' miracles, they had heard about Jesus' crowds, they had heard about his teachings, his claims, but the thing is, they didn't come to celebrate what he was doing, they came to criticize it. And don't you just love when people go out of their way to cause you problems? Anybody ever had something like that? They went out of their way to cause you problems. And here's the thing, when we need certain people in our lives to be an encouragement to us, we're having a hard time, we want somebody just to show up and to be there, they vanished. It's like, where are they at? They're MIA. You can send up a flare, you can call their phone, but they ain't coming. They ain't going to be there. They're not going to show up. They're not going to offer any kind of encouragement. But the moment that you do something that upsets somebody or that they didn't like, they become like a super assassin. They will hunt you down, track you down to find you just to let you know what you did that they didn't like. And in Alabama, we had this old-timey saying, say, well, that just burns my biscuits, Stuff like that just burns my biscuits. And I'm sure for Jesus, he felt the same way. The good news is, if you've ever felt that way, about someone, Jesus really understands what you're going through because he dealt with that exact same thing. And look with me in Matthew chapter 15, verse 1 at this story. It says that Jesus then came to Jesus, scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, "Why do thy disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread." But he answered and said unto them, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor your father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, Whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, It is a gift, by whosoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition." He says, "Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, This people draw nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. He says, But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." So let me help you understand what's going on. These people, these religious leaders come all this way on this long trip to complain about Jesus. And what was their complaint? What fault did they find? Get this. This was their issue. The disciples didn't wash their hands. I mean, isn't that crazy? Isn't that wild that they came all this way and that was their big issue, that was their big gripe against Jesus? Don't stuff like that just drive you crazy? In life I found sometimes you can do 100 things right, and it's the one thing that you do wrong that people are going to nitpick about, that people are going to point out. Here Jesus is, he's healing the sick, he's feeding the hungry, he's casting out demons. And yet they show up saying, Jesus, we notice your disciples they didn't wash their hands and we're not happy about it. What are you going to do about it? You know, that's the kind of people that we're dealing with here. And I'm guessing the Pharisees must have been like me and some of you, that they had a very strict mama that made them wash their hands every time that they came in from playing outside before they could eat. Anybody like that? That was your mom? That you not many hands, so a lot of you are just dirty. Okay, you love germs. That's great. I'm sure your immune system is a little stronger than everybody else's because you've been shoveling in all them germs your whole life. But get this is not about germs. It was not about hygiene. This was about a religious ritual. You know, the Pharisees, they had added all these kind of rules to God's Word, and they basically had a ceremony or some kind of rule for everything, including how you wash your hands. There was rules about how to wash your hands, when to wash your hands, how much water to use, what direction that your hands should be facing, and on and on. They even went so strict to say that you had to wash your hands in between courses of meals. So there was multiple times you were supposed to even wash your hands in one sitting. And they were experts at looking clean on the outside. But Jesus here exposes the real issue. And what he does is he quotes the Old Testament. Notice there he said in verse 7, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying. He's talking about the book of Isaiah, the Old Testament. He's saying what Isaiah said back then really was a prophecy about you right now. Okay? So he's calling them out. And this is what Isaiah said. He says, this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth and honoreth me with their lips. But get this, he says, their heart is far from me. In other words, Jesus said, you say the right things, you may even do the right things, but get this, your heart is in the wrong place. And that's a scary thought. Let me tell you why that's scary. Because Jesus is teaching us this, that it's possible to look close to God on the outside, but be far from God on the inside. You can look the part on the outside, but you may not have the real thing on the inside. You can know the songs, you can know the verses, you can come to church, you may even serve in ministry. You may, to everyone else, look spiritual. You may look close to God. But guess what? Jesus is not just looking at your hands, He's looking at your heart. He's not just looking at what's going on the outside, He knows what goes on much deeper on the inside. So the question is simple this morning, is your heart close to God? Is your heart close to God? Of course, naturally, everyone's going to say, of course, I'm close to God. I'm the closest. I've never been closest. I'm the most closest I could be. That would ever be everyone's natural response. But let me ask you this. How do you know? How do you know that your heart is close to God? I think Jesus in our text gives us 3 areas to examine to know whether we're really close to God or not. So let me give you those this morning. Number 1, we must examine first and foremost what we prioritize. What we prioritize. The first thing that Jesus calls attention to with these Pharisees is their priorities. Because here's the thing, what you prioritize will always reveal what you truly value. What you prioritize, what you put a premium on in life will actually show where your heart is. That's what Matthew 6:21 says. It says, for where your treasure is, there will what? Your heart be also. That's going to show you what you put a high premium on in your life will show you what's actually important to you in reality. You know, you can say all day that God matters most, but guess what? Your priorities will eventually tell the truth of whether that's actually true or not. And the issue with these religious leaders was not necessarily that what they were doing or what they were teaching was bad. The issue was that what they were doing was giving their best attention to the wrong things. And I guarantee you we've all been guilty of that at some point in our life. Giving our best attention to the wrong things. The things that should not matter as much as we give them credit for. For one, these people, they prioritized traditions over truth. The Jews had collections of these traditions that were passed down and they were collected in these huge books, these huge volumes of literature that anyone who was a Jew was supposed to know and was supposed to keep. And the problem was all of these rules and all these traditions were not actually the Bible. They were not actually Scripture. And the idea was that we don't want to do anything to go against God's commands. So what we'll do is we'll create these extra rules, these extra commands to be kind of a fence around God's rules so that we can make sure that we don't break any of them. And on the surface of that sounds really great, right? I mean, look, hey, let's do all that we can to obey God, right? Let's keep His law. Let's keep His rules. Let's try to avoid doing anything that might break that. So why not add a little bit if we can keep ourselves a little extra safe from doing that? But over time, what happened was this fence became more important than the field. And what I mean by that is that these rules they had became more important than the laws that they were supposed to protect. And Jesus basically says, hey, look, you're worried that my disciples are breaking your traditions. Meanwhile, you're all ignoring God's actual commandments. And He used this example of the commandment to honor thy father and mother. We all know that from the 10 Commandments. Listen, you may not remember all 10, but I guarantee that's probably one of the ones that you could name. Honor thy father and mother, because growing up we all heard that, right? Our parents all used that against us. Like your parents may not have known any other verse in the Bible. They may not even go to church, but they knew honor thy father and mother. The Bible says it. You're supposed to do it. You're supposed to honor me, right? And so He uses this command. There was no doubt about it. God had clearly given this command to His people to honor their father and mother. And we often think of that as you ought to obey them or you ought to respect them. And that's true. That's definitely a part of it. But doing that, respecting them and obeying them also meant caring for them, especially as they got older. Because think about this. Back then, they didn't have any kind of retirement plans. They didn't have any kind of assisted living homes that you could send your family to. So it fell upon the children when their parents got elderly that they had a responsibility, according to God's commands, to take care of them. But the Pharisees were smart. And they had created a religious loophole to get out of fulfilling that responsibility. Because according to Jewish tradition, a person could declare their money possessions as korban. And what that meant was it was dedicated to God. That this whatever it was, had been dedicated to God. So instead of using those resources that they had to help their parents, they would simply say, well, I would like to help. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. I would really love to be there for you. But this has been korban. This has been dedicated to God. And on the outside, it sounded really spiritual. Oh, well, they're using it for the Lord, right? They're being real spiritual with their stuff. But what Jesus says is you do that, but it's actually disobedience. You're actually being disobedient to God's command. And here's the point. Understand this. We sometimes use religious traditions and personal preferences as a substitute for biblical responsibility. We all have done that before. I've seen it played out time and time again inside the modern church. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that traditions are bad. Traditions can be great. I think our church has traditions. Everybody has family traditions. I guarantee you around the holidays you have certain traditions with your family. We have ministry traditions here at our church. I'm thinking about our youth. They're getting ready to go to Youth Aflame here soon. Ever since I've been here, we've gone to Youth Aflame. That's kind of a tradition in of itself. But one of the traditions of going to Youth Aflame, and I have some great memories of this, is the last night that we're at youth conference, we get alone after the last service and we go and the kids share testimonies about how God spoke to them that week. And that's always something that I look forward to, favorite part of the week, because you really get to see, you don't really know. You see people go to the altar, you see them maybe pray and you hope they're making decisions, but you don't really know. And so it's an opportunity for them to kind of make those decisions real and to share. And we've had kids who've shared about God calling them into ministry, God, just speaking to their heart about different things. It's always a little bit of an emotional time, and it's just a really great tradition that we've always had when it comes to Youth Aflame. And I hope it's one that will continue. And I've even seen other churches, since our church has been doing that over the years, that a lot of churches do that now. A lot of youth groups that are there will find a place and get alone, and it's kind of become the popular thing to do. And that's a good tradition. Not all traditions are bad. And that's not what Jesus is saying. But what He is teaching us is this, is that when our likes and our dislikes, our traditions, our preferences start mattering more to us than what God has clearly said to us, it stops becoming just a preference and it starts becoming an idol. It stops becoming just something we like or dislike, and it becomes something that we worship. an idol to us, no matter how spiritual that we may make it sound. And I see this happen all the time. You know, we get bothered by things God never mentioned. We get upset about things that's not in the Bible, and then we ignore or we look past things God has spoke very clearly on. That's oftentimes the attitude that we have about things. And let me give you an example. I've witnessed a lot of times, a lot of Christians get upset and complain about something that they didn't like in the service. And for whatever reason, I blame Brother Preston for this, it's always the music, right? That's always what it is. You know, the volume's too loud, didn't sing enough of this type of song, whatever. You know, I'm just kidding. But it's always something around that or something they didn't like in the service. And I've seen people get upset and complain about that. But one thing that I've found over the years is a lot of times those same people that get upset about all these little things that, can I say, is not in the Bible, there's no specific rule about, it's just what they like and dislike. Those same people a lot of times don't serve, don't contribute, or contribute very, very little. They're not really involved, and they don't really participate and obey some of the things that I think God's been pretty clear that we should obey. And they look past some things that I think He's spoken very clearly, black and white on. And here's the thing. Once your preferences become the measuring stick of your life, then your satisfaction becomes your goal. When your preferences are what you measure everything by, with your likes and dislikes, then the goal is not, does this make God happy? The goal is ultimately, does this make me happy? And we stop asking, what does God want? And we start getting focused on, what do I want? What do I prefer? What do I like? That's the danger in this. But not only did they value traditions over truth, they also prioritized appearance over authenticity. You know, on the outside, the Pharisees looked close to God. They knew the right words, they knew the right rules, they had the right reputation, but Jesus still said to them, your hearts are far from God. And what that tells me is this, is that you can look right and still not be right. Did y'all hear me? You can look right, but still not actually be right with God. And Jesus called them hypocrites, which to them referred to an actor, someone who was putting on a performance, putting on a show, someone who wore a mask to hide the truth. In other words, He's calling them fake. That's what Jesus is saying to them. He says it's all for show. It's fake. You're just an actor. You're a hypocrite. In Matthew 23, Jesus compared these same people to whitewashed tombs. And what He meant was, hey, you look great on the outside, but you know what a tomb is? It keeps dead bodies in. You look great on the outside, but on the inside, you're dead. That's what Jesus was calling them out about. And don't miss what He's really saying. He's saying that it's possible to live a way that appears holy in public, but actually is hollow in heaven. And maybe that's you today. You to everyone else appear like you're close to God, but in heaven, it's empty. There's emptiness. There's darkness. There's deceit. Understand, God is neither convinced by or impressed with our performance. And I hate that. I know that is the case for every church. Everywhere I've ever been, growing up, I've always heard people use as an excuse, I don't want to go to church there because there's hypocrites. That's always going to be the case. I get that. And I'm not saying anyone specific. But what I do know, because I've been in church basically my entire life, is that Christians can be really good at performing sometimes. We know how to put on a show, especially when we don't want to let people really know how bad things really are. And I know because I've been guilty of that myself. We come in, we smile. You all know how it goes getting ready for church. You're screaming and hollering in the car. You get out, hey, what's up? How's it going? It's so good to see you. And you don't mean it. It's all a show. It's performance. Or you come, you sing, you do all these things, and you look great. And you convinced a lot of people. But let me tell you who you haven't fooled. You haven't fooled God. You can't fool Him, because 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 7 says, the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. And here's the question I have to ask, and we have to ask ourselves, is am I doing what I do because I love God, or because I want people to think that I love God? I think there's a big difference. There's a big distinction. They valued traditions over truth, appearance over authenticity, but also they prioritized rules over relationship. To put it simply, they walked with God only so that they could check boxes. And really, if you think about it, by our standards, they were probably more committed than most believers that we know. For most of us, a lot of times we struggle to come to church every week. But understand that these people that Jesus was calling out, they had hundreds of rules that they had to keep every single day. By our standard today, they would have been way more committed to God than anybody else that we knew. They were constantly doing good things for God. But what this teaches me is something that really I'm still trying to learn myself and that I struggle with at times. And that is that spiritual busyness does not always equal spiritual closeness. And what I mean by that is doing more for God does not always mean you're walking close with God. And that's something that I sometimes struggle with. I think having a full calendar is great, but that doesn't mean that your heart is full. Your heart may be totally empty. And just because you are busy doing good things for God doesn't actually mean that you are close to God. We do a lot of good things. Prayer is good. Bible reading is good. Coming to a small group is good. Coming to church is good. Serving is good. Giving is good. All these things are great. Having events. I love having events at our church. All these things are great. But good things become dangerous when they become a substitute for God Himself. That's exactly what happened in the story of Mary and Martha when they're with Jesus in Luke chapter 10. Jesus comes to visit His two friends, and you've got these two sisters, and they have two totally different approaches to how they want to serve Jesus. Mary wants to sit there and just listen to Him and take it all in, and Martha, she's a servant. She wants to serve, and she wants to do things for God. And the whole story goes that Martha is there serving, she's there ministering, she's doing what she thinks is best for Jesus. And she sees her sister, her lazy old sister Mary, just sitting there doing nothing, and she gets mad and upset, and she begins to complain and grumble. And Jesus condemns not Mary for being lazy, He condemns Martha, who's over here doing all this for Jesus. And the reason that He condemned her was not because she wasn't trying to do a good thing. It was because her activity had become a replacement for intimacy. And I think we are the very same way sometimes. We look busy. We do a lot of good things for God, but just because you're constantly serving, just because you're constantly here, just because you're constantly praising, does not actually mean that you are close to God. Now, those things can help you get closer to God, but that doesn't actually mean that you have a close walk with Him. We have to be careful that we don't get so caught up in doing good things for God that we miss actually walking with God. And that's something that I have to learn myself. So we have to examine what we prioritize. When we're asking ourselves, is my heart close to God? What do you prioritize? What do you value? But the second thing is we have to examine what we produce. Jesus calls this crowd together and says to them this in verse 17. He says, "Do you not understand that whatsoever entereth at the mouth goeth into the belly and cast out into draught? But those things which proceedeth out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceedeth evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witnesses, blasphemies." He says, "These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands defileth not a man." What comes out of your life, he says, will always reveal what's going on in your heart. Because here's the thing, a bad heart cannot produce good fruit forever. If there's an issue inside that's going on, eventually it's going to come out into your life one way or another. And Jesus points out several bad fruits that are revealed from a bad heart. Number one is corrupt speech. Jesus taught that our mouths are the great messengers of our heart. In Luke chapter 6, verse 45, Jesus said, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." You know, the mouth is like a bucket, and our hearts are like the well. And if that bucket keeps bringing up muddy water, guess what? The problem is not the bucket. The problem is the source. The problem is the well. And that's why what we say matters. How we talk to people matters. How we talk about people matters. Because our mouths expose what our hearts try to hide. And that's why David prayed in Psalm 19, verse 14, "Let the words of my mouth," and he said, "the meditation of my heart be acceptable in the sight of the Lord." You see, David understood that there was this inseparable connection between our words and our hearts. So one way to know if your heart is drifting from God is to ask, what has been coming out of your mouth lately? What have your words been revealing about your heart? Another fruit of a heart that's far from God is a critical spirit. You know, one of the signs of a heart that's far from God is when we begin looking for fault in others to cover up failure within ourselves. The Pharisees had traveled for days just to point out what Jesus was doing wrong. But get this, if we aren't careful, we can end up just like the Pharisees, missing the miracle because we were too obsessed with the method. You know, the Pharisees witnessed a lot of the same miracles as everybody else. But guess what? They missed it because they were too busy trying to pick it apart. And maybe today that's you. There's good things going on in our church. God is doing great things around you, but you're missing it because you're too busy trying to find what's wrong with everything that's going on. Think about this. A critical heart can stand close enough to see the work of God and still be too proud to celebrate it. That's a dangerous place, I think, to be in. Because if you enjoy finding fault more than you enjoy seeing God's grace, something is wrong within you. It produces a heart that's far from God. It produces a critical spirit. It produces corrupt speech. But another product of a heart that's far from God is callous behavior. You know, the Pharisees weren't just far from God, they were hardened towards God. And Jesus, in the verses we read, lists all these sins that a heart that's far from God will produce, like murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, blasphemy. And again, these are all outward actions, but Jesus says, hey, guess where they began? They began inside. There was a source and a root to where these fruits came from. James chapter 1 teaches it this way. It says, every man is tempted when he is drawn out of his own lust and enticed. And when that lust hath conceived, then it brings forth sin. And when sin is finished, bringeth forth death. And what that teaches us is that sin does not start when it becomes visible. It roots itself and festers long before then within us, within our hearts, before it ever springs out of us. And anybody else ever watched stories on the news? You've seen these stories, especially of Christians or pastors. I've seen a lot of this lately, or just people you assume probably, you would have thought were good people, and then they do horrible things and wonder, how does a person end up like that? Have y'all ever thought that? It seems like a lot lately. Maybe it's just the algorithm's been feeding it to me, but it seems like, wow, what is going on? How do these people keep falling into this deep, dark sin? Where did they get to? How do you get to that point? I don't even understand it. My mind can't even comprehend sometimes. And here's the thing. What I understand is that nobody ruins their life all at once. It starts long before that with these small cracks, these small compromises. And one of the proofs that your heart is far from God, get this, is when you stop being moved by what moves God. Is that you today? You're no longer moved by the things that once moved you, by the things that move the Lord. Maybe sin doesn't convict you like it used to. Maybe lost people don't burden you like they once did. Maybe broken people don't move you like they used to. Maybe the Word of God doesn't stir you like it used to. Maybe the presence of God doesn't humble you like it used to. And that's why we have to take this condition of our heart seriously. Because what you tolerate in your heart today will ultimately destroy you tomorrow. What you tolerate today is eventually going to come out in your life later on. And it could end in ruin. For not just you, but for your family and everybody else that comes down with you. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 says, keep your heart, or guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Our hearts are way too important to leave unguarded. We have to pay close attention to the things that we allow to shape us. Because those things don't just shape us, they control us. They influence us. And so ask yourself, what are you allowing now in your life that maybe years ago you wouldn't have? What are you allowing right now you're saying okay to, you're giving approval to, that at one point in time you never would have? What are you excusing and making excuses for that in your heart of hearts you know that you really shouldn't? What are you hiding in your life that maybe today God's saying, hey, it's time to come clean. You need to come clean up. You need to stop hiding and you need to start confessing. What are you ignoring in your life that you need to confront? Hebrews chapter 3 verse 15 says, today, if you will hear His voice, harden not your hearts. And notice that one tiny word, if. He says, if you will hear His voice. The idea is this: God didn't stop speaking, we just stopped listening. The thing is, God is always speaking. God is always working. God is always moving. And if He once moved you and He doesn't move you anymore, guess what? The problem isn't God. The problem is you. God didn't move. You did. And if we want to know the condition of our hearts, we've got to start examining what are our lives producing. What kind of fruit are we actually seeing in our lives? Does it reveal fruit of a heart that's close to God or one that's far from God? Hey, what kind of things are you prioritizing in your life? And then the third and final thing is that we have to examine what you pursue. You know, the Pharisees looked like they were pursuing God, but in reality, they were really pursuing themselves. And get this, who or what you claim to worship is not shown by what you claim, it's shown by what you chase. In your life, who you actually worship is not shown by the words that you say, but how you actually live and what you are actually pursuing after. And the text reveals three options that we have to choose from when it comes to what we chase after in life. Number one, we can chase after control. The reason that the Pharisees were upset wasn't because Jesus was breaking their rules. That's why they acted upset, but that wasn't really why they were upset. They were upset because He was threatening their control, and they didn't like that. Jesus was threatening their way. And to someone's heart that's far from God, the gospel is always a threat. Because the foundation of the gospel is not control, it's surrender. The very crux of what the gospel is all about is the very opposite of having control of your life. Because if you know what Jesus told to His disciples over and over again, multiple times, do you remember what He said? He said, if any man will come after me, let him do what? Deny himself, take up his... Y'all are acting like y'all don't know this. Okay, this is the Bible. It's from Matthew chapter 16, 24. You can read it sometime. He said, well, if any man come after me, you want to follow me, let him deny himself, say no to yourself, take up your cross, which was an instrument of death, not something you hang around your neck. Take up your cross and follow me. You know, the world teaches us that to get the most out of life, it must be all about yourself. What you want, what makes you happy, what works for you, your truth, what works for you. But understand what Jesus said, that following Him means that you give up control. And it's not about you, it's not about what you want, it's all about Him. And it's all about what He wants. And we have a hard time with that sometimes. We sometimes like to act like we are still calling the shots. We want to follow Jesus, but we still want to hold on to that control. We want God to work, but we want Him to work our way. We want God to move, but we also want Him to use our methods when He does it. We want Him to move how we want Him to move. We want God to bless, but we also want Him to allow us to do what we want at the same time. We want all those blessings, all those benefits from God without the responsibility. And what we're actually saying is this: God, I want to follow you, but I'm still going to sit on the throne of my heart. I'm still going to be the one behind the wheel. And get this, God is not looking to ride shotgun to your life. And maybe you need to hear that this morning. God is not looking to ride shotgun. Because here's the thing, if God is not the one behind the wheel, He's not riding shotgun, He's not even in the car. And some people, you think you got Jesus with you, He's passenger to your life, and you don't realize, like the Pharisees, He's not with you at all. Your hearts are far from God. God's not with you. If He's not behind the wheel, if He's not in control, He's not with you at all. You have to give Him control. And some chase control. Others chase comfort. Another reason the Pharisees hated Jesus was because they liked things just how they were. They didn't want to change. In other words, they were comfortable. And that's because they had found this religious way of living to avoid costly obedience. And if we're honest, we can do the same things. We want to obey God, but we prefer obedience that doesn't inconvenience us. God, I don't want to be inconvenienced. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to go out of my way, out of my comfort zone. I don't want to do things that I don't like. I like things this way. I don't want to change too much. But guess what? Jesus never calls us to comfortable Christianity. God's greatest desire for us is not our happiness, but our holiness. And that's not to say that God doesn't want you happy, that God doesn't like your joy in your life. But to be holy like He's holy sometimes is costly. To be holy like God is holy sometimes is inconvenient. Sometimes it messes up your plans and it messes up your schedule. Even worse, to be holy like God is holy sometimes is painful. It takes you down a road that's hard. It's not always easy, and sometimes it can be really painful and difficult. But remember the warning Jesus gave in Mark chapter 8, verse 36. He said, "For what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" In other words, what good is it to gain everything you wanted but lose what matters most? And that's the danger, I think, of chasing comfort. Comfort will always tell you to choose the easy road, but Jesus calls us to choose the narrow road. And then there's the third option. You have control, you have comfort, or you can choose to chase after Christ. And that's really where Jesus is driving this whole conversation. Not a heart that wants to control, not a heart that wants comfort, but a heart that says, Jesus, I want you more than anything else. And sometimes I think we overcomplicate it. You know, chasing after Christ really just simply means this: intentionally drawing near to Him every single day. That's really what chasing after Christ, pursuing Christ really means. James chapter 4, verse 8 says, "Draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh to you." You know, God's not playing hard to get. He's not trying to hide from you. Guess what? He wants you more than you actually want Him. He wants to be close to you. But the thing is, you may accidentally drift away from God, but you're never going to accidentally draw near to God. Did y'all understand that? You may accidentally start drifting away from Him, but you're never just going to stumble into obedience or fall into Christ-likeness, or suddenly just wake up and, wow, I'm accidentally holy today. That's not how it works. If we want our hearts to be close to God and to stay close to God, then guess what? We have to continually choose Him over and over again every single day. Otherwise, we'll end up just like the Pharisees, because they had the rules, they had the religion, they had the rituals, but guess what they didn't have? They didn't have the relationship. They did not have a true relationship with Jesus. And one of the scariest things possible, I think, is to be around the things of God and still miss God Himself. Sometimes it keeps me up a little bit, thinking of people that I know that are so familiar with the things of God, but I wonder, do they actually really know Him? Is their hearts close to Him? They look good on the outside, but what if one day they're like that person that Jesus says, "Lord, Lord," and He says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." That troubles me. I've even felt that way about myself sometimes, if I'm being honest. And I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be like that. You know, I read a story about a man who was walking through a yard sale. Anybody here like to yard sale? You got, oh, come on now, honest confession. You're like, don't be shy. I read a story about a man who was going to a yard sale, and he was going through, and this painting, it caught his eye. And it wasn't a bright, colorful painting, and it wasn't really anything special. It wasn't even really that big. It was kind of a simple portrait of an older, bearded man sitting by the sea. He was smoking a pipe, and he was repairing fishing nets. And there wasn't anything very special about the painting, except at the corner it was signed Ellimer. And it's on the screen there. You can see the picture there. And to them it was just another old painting at a yard sale. Nothing special about it. But this man, as he was walking through, saw something that other people missed. He quickly asked the person running the yard sale, "Hey, how much is this painting?" And he said, "$50. And he immediately said, "Yes, absolutely," because he felt like there was something just special and unique about it. And to the person in the yard sale, $50 for this old painting? Sure. Wow, I just won, close up shop. That was way more than I expected, right? And so this guy takes this painting home, and he can't get it off his mind, so he decides that he's going to go and have it looked at. He's going to have it appraised and examined to find out, is it worth anything? And so he does. He has it go, and people look at it, and they begin to question, hey, maybe this is something special. And eventually it ends up with the Smithsonian. And they have their best scientists looking at it, their best people, researchers, and know all this art and all this history and stuff. And come to find out, this painting that this man bought for $50 was a lost Van Gogh painting that was worth $15 million. You can go read on the Smithsonian website about it. $15 million. He bought it for $50. And think about how many people stood inches away from treasure and walked away because they never recognized what it was worth. They were so close, but they just missed it. And that's exactly what makes Jesus' words to these Pharisees so sobering. He said, "You honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me." The Pharisees were standing in front of Jesus. They were hearing the words of Jesus. They were seeing the works of Jesus. But guess what? They missed it. They missed it. Let me ask you today, are you going to miss it? You're here, sure, you're at church on Memorial Day weekend. Hey, I get it. You're doing something. But don't miss what really matters most. You know, they were standing in front of the greatest treasure heaven had ever given, and all they could see was unwashed hands. One of the scariest things to imagine is to be around the things of God and still miss God Himself. But I believe it happens all the time. And listen, don't miss what Jesus is saying today. It's possible, I believe, to live life and do all the right things and still not have the real thing. And I ask you, is that you this morning? Sometimes the most dangerous place to be is not always far from church. I think sometimes the most dangerous place to be is sitting in church, right where we're at today, singing the songs, hearing the truth, knowing all the words, but inwardly you're empty. You're cold and you're distant from God. So I ask you that question again. Can you honestly say your heart is close to God? Is your heart close to God? Will you stand with me and bow your heads this morning? As you do and the musicians come, the invitation is really simple. Listen, I know we all really good at coming to church. We know how to put on the show. And sometimes I worry that we're really not far off from these religious leaders of that day. And my invitation is this. Will you come this morning and stop pretending? Stop hiding. Stop performing. Stop playing the part and get real before God. I'm speaking to you, person who's been in the church your whole life. I'm speaking to you, person who serves in this ministry and everybody thinks, oh yeah, they're doing great. They're a great Christian. But maybe you know, because God has revealed it to you, that there's something missing. Hey, listen, I'm going to go home and I'm going to know where I'm at with God. So this isn't about me. This isn't about the person sitting next to you. This is about you. Because the danger is we could end up just like the Pharisees and be around the things of God, do good things for God, and still miss God Himself. And listen, I don't care if you've been in church your whole life or you're a new believer or you've just gotten back in church, but I think all of us should say, I just want to be close to God. Would you just raise your hand this morning and say, Brother Ron, that's me. I want to be close to God. I want my heart to be close to Him. I want to stay close to God. I don't want to drift away from Him. I see your hands. So this morning, if that's you, you want to stay close to God. As the musicians play, will you come and say, God, just keep me close to you. Help my heart to stay close to you. I don't want to drift away from you. Let me stay close.